All right. Hello and welcome again to another episode of Sacktown Talks. Today we have a very special guest, Julie Baker, joining us, Executive Director for Californians for Art. Julie, thanks for joining the program. How's it going?
It's going well. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. It's been an interesting time in the past year for every business, every sort of interest out there. Can you, kind of tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of about Californians for Arts and kind of what you guys been doing lately?
Sure. So Californians for the Arts is a statewide arts, culture, and creative industries advocacy organization. So we essentially, our mission is to build public awareness of the value of our sector and our industry to the state of California. And in particular on this, we also have another organization called California Arts Advocates, which is a direct lobbying organization. And in that case, our job there is to influence legislation, policy, and resources to support our sector.
Right. So I guess, the past year, everything, looking at, going to museums, theaters, has all been kind of stricken. I guess how have the arts survived the past year, and kind of what are you guys doing now to kind of mitigate around this kind of COVID issues?
The only reason the arts have survived this past year, I'll be honest with you, has been a mixture of federal support from PPP loans, pandemic unemployment assistance, and EIDL and some of the other programs that came out of CARES Act funding in particular, and philanthropic support. The combination of those two has allowed many arts organizations to stand to survive, as I'd like to say, to stop the bleeding, as it were. But what is also really disturbing and something that we need to be very aware of is how many arts workers are unemployed. So some of the organizations and the institutions might be sort of hanging on by threads from these relief packages that we've been getting, but the arts workers, 63% nationally, are unemployed, and we're finding that here in the state of California, the performing arts sector in particular is one of the hardest hit sectors because of we were the first to close and still are not open, and we are now a year later. So it's a devastating time for our sector, and it is our job for sure to make sure that policymakers are aware of that.
Can you give us an idea of the scope of the magnitude, the different mediums, I guess, that you guys represent and work with?
For many, many years, really, I think what we were primarily focused on was the nonprofit arts sector in particular, because that's really who was receiving public funding for the arts, and artists and arts workers directly. In this last year, what we've also found is that the for-profit sector has also been devastated by the impact of the shuttered venues and the closures that we've experienced, and basically the inability to earn revenue. And so I think now what you're finding is our coalition is really representative of the entire arts ecosystem. So that's everything from the individual artist, and that artist could be anything from a literary artist, a visual artist, a performing artist, to the larger, Live Nations on the other end of the spectrum, who we're also talking with and addressing what are some of the pain points of what's happening to our sector.
Through this pandemic, technology has allowed us to kind of bridge the gap on these things, and businesses have found a way to kind of navigate through. Has there been any aspect in the arts community where you've been able to use technology to, I guess, make it through, or maybe have found a better way to, get the product out there?
Absolutely. I think, there certainly are silver linings, in terms of what we've learned as an industry. And one of them is that what we hear frequently from people who have been able to hold on and keep their organizations intact enough to have some staff left to be able to pivot or to hire artists to do programming, is that streaming of live events, when we're able to do those, or past recordings and things like that, has really broadened audiences. And so where you were limited to maybe your region or tourists who were coming to your region to access and to be a part of your engagement strategies, we now have international audiences seeing small theaters from any place. It doesn't matter where you're located. So I think that's a silver lining in terms of audience development engagement. The struggle is how to monetize that, how to make money from it. And I think that, we're not used to, as people who've been, utilizing this tool for a long time, paying for it.
Right.
The ability to just turn something on and stream it and watch it was pretty much for free, except for subscription services like Netflix and Amazon and others. So I think that what we're going to have to learn is how to become like subscription services as well. And but I think at the end of the day, what makes our industry different is that being together in a gathering, experiencing something that is live, is the magic of it. Right. So I think you'll find that the future of our sector is both and. We'll do the live when we can get back to that business, and we will do the streaming so we can continue to engage wider audiences, so that when people do start to travel again, they're like, oh my gosh, I watched this amazing thing from this tiny town in, Northern California, and I want to go back. I'm going to go visit them because it looks amazing. So,
ever since, the guidelines have come out for museums and art performances, I know the past couple of weeks, you guys have been kind of working with the governor's office and trying to find some balance and some equity to kind of help it, let these museums kind of open again. Can you give us an update on kind of where you guys are at and kind of the progress you guys are seeing and hoping to open in maybe the next few weeks or months here?
Yeah, so we're certainly hopeful that we'll see some hope on the horizon for the arts in terms of reopening. But let me just sort of set the scene. So there's museums that actually do have guidelines and have been able to, when they're not in the purple tier, be open in the state of California. As we know, this winter, we all went back to purple essentially, and we're only starting to now reopen again. And the museums are looking for parity with other, like, businesses like shopping malls, for example, are open in purple, but museums are not. And so that meant that the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, for example, is because Los Angeles has never been out of purple pretty much since the tiers were created, has not been able to be open. It's the only museum in the United States that has not been open in a year. Wow. So that's something that, the industry is looking for parity. On live performing arts, unfortunately, I would say it's not worse, but it's a different scenario in that we are not even on the guidelines. In other words, if you looked up live theater right now in any tier, it just says closed. There's one section sort of buried within the website on COVID-19ca.gov that says that in the moderate and minimal tier, you can do 100 outside and 50 outside, but you have to contact your local public health official and get the guidelines. Well, that's a problem because, as we know, first of all, public health departments, particularly in smaller communities or even Los Angeles, are under-resourced. They don't have enough people. And then also what happens is your smaller budget arts organization maybe doesn't have the capacity to create their own guidelines. Go to their local public health officer, ask them to pass those for them, then they bring them up to the state and so on. It would be much better and much more equitable if we actually had state guidelines for live performing arts. What we're finding now too is that, a year ago when everything started, they said, shut down the arts in particular. It's about gathering. It's bad. It's dangerous. We all went, absolutely, we're done. We'll shut the door. We'll stream. We'll do whatever we need to do. There's not an industry, I think, that cares more about patron safety than the arts. That's what we're all prepared to do. And we do professionally, we do for a living. We move people through buildings and through events. That's what we have to do and have done for decades upon decades. So now what we're looking at is we're now getting to a place a year later where studies have now come out that are starting to say that theaters and museums are actually safer environments than even, let's say, bars and shopping. Because if you're in a theater, you don't have to take your mask off ever. I mean, there's no reason to do it, to sit in an audience and you're not eating. You don't have to be drinking. And we can control where you sit. You're ticketed, so we know where you're coming from. We can only put you with your pod. I mean, there's so many things that actually have more controls in terms of the arts and then other industries, but we still don't have those guidelines. And now we're at a place where the vaccinations are getting more available. We're getting into warmer months. We need guidelines to prepare so that we hope that you can see events happening this summer, like New York has just announced. And we want to be able to get artists back to work and to give people an opportunity to gather safely and enjoy themselves.
That's kind of interesting. I guess, in the film, they've worked to get guidelines so that they can
Hmm.
continue shooting. The movie
Yep,
theaters have guidelines which allow them to open, I believe, in the red tier.
that's correct.
Um, and so, yeah, why not the same parity for I guess performing arts? That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's been a struggle. And again, I mean, I have great empathy for the governor's office and for California Department of Public Health and the balancing act that they're trying to do, which is to keep us safe and keep people from dying, as well as keep commerce going. So I understand it's a challenge for
Right.
them. But I think a year in, we're at a place where we can't afford to be shut down for any longer. I mean, honestly, it's like we're very concerned that people are leaving the arts industries. If you don't see yourself in the pathway to California's recovery because you're not even in the guidelines,
Hmm.
you start to question, is this an industry I should be a part of because I can't make money?
Right.
And, I mean, the line goes, I mean, what business school teaches someone to be shut down for over a year and to survive? It's a really or to be out of work for that long and not even have like I say, a runway in front of you to know what it's going to look like.
Mhm.
So that's what we're not asking to reopen until it's safe to do so, but we're asking for the plans so
Right.
we can plan to reopen. Because the other thing that's different about performing arts in particular is that it takes time. We can't just flip on a switch and the performers are there and let's put on the show. The show takes rehearsals.
Right.
The show takes set building. The show takes touring artists. The show takes a lot of planning. So we need months to get that going. And so that's why we need those guidelines now.
Kind of, I guess you alluded to this earlier, but you kind of mentioned New York has plans in place and is beginning to work on reopening. Can you kind of give us a little more detail on, I guess, what other states are doing to kind of help their arts?
Absolutely. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I mean, California just issued part of the $2 billion Small Business Relief Grants Program, $50 million to cultural institutions, which is great. We're really thrilled that the legislature and the governor recognize the disproportionate impact and the need for that specific application process for our sector. But, again, those reopening guidelines, Washington State has them. New York has started to prepare for outdoor performances. For example, at Lincoln Center, they've made it into a whole outdoor plaza for performances in outside, as I mentioned. The governor in New York has also issued a concept around pop-ups throughout the state. So again, sort of state-issued, state-sanctioned events where they're controlling the environment. They're hiring celebrities like Amy Poehler and others, which is fun and great. We would prefer to see that as a local
Right.
program and hire local artists. But things like that, we're seeing that, a lot of it depends on the state, as you know, in terms of where they are and it's sort of their reaction to COVID. And again, I mean, we're not advocating to reopen arts before it's safe to do so. But we also know that the story of what we knew a year ago is really different in terms of what we know today, in terms of the capability of our sector to be able to respond, to be able to do things safely. And we need to be given that option if we choose to reopen. That's up to every
Right.
individual and every business to do so. And entertainment labor unions also are on board with particular guidelines like they did for the TV, music, and film production. They also, we've worked with many of them on the performing arts side to look at ways that we can do it. We want to keep people safe. That's number one. But we also need to give parity to our sector and give people a chance to get back to work.
Exactly. Kind of one thing you alluded to earlier was kind of the difference between, I guess, nonprofit and for-profit arts. Can you kind of, I guess, give us an explanation of the nonprofits, how they, get their funding, and how the funding has, I guess, been effective this past year?
Traditionally, if you were a healthy arts nonprofit, you would try to have a majority of your revenue coming from what they call earned income, ticket sales,
Hmm.
concessions, et cetera. And then so it'd be like 60-40 would be a really good nonprofit equation for an arts. And that was part of what makes us different as a sector from other nonprofits, is that we had an ability to earn revenue. That, of course, went away a year ago. So that put us in almost a worse position in a sense, because we were not as dependent upon only grants and what they call contributed revenue. Now, in the United States, however, we don't fund the arts at the same level as other countries like England. So public funding for the arts is not as high as what sponsorships and corporations and individual donors and foundations. So we're still pretty low in terms of public funding for the arts, which of course we always advocate to increase, because that's how we make arts, allow arts to be accessible for every community and every person, is that if it's equitable funding opportunities.
And yeah, I guess, what do you know, or have off the top of your hand, how much does the state of California, I guess, put into the arts and to the arts
I can tell you.
nonprofits of their budget?
I can tell you exactly that number. The state primarily funds the arts through what's called the State Arts Agency, which is the California Arts Council. The California Arts Council's current funding in ongoing, not like one time, not one special bucket of funds, but just what they call local assistance funds that goes into every county in California, is $26 million. It's what we like to refer to affectionately as budget dust.
Right.
It's a very small amount. It's 73 cents per capita per person in the state of California. We made that testimony actually quite recently at an assembly hearing, and we were really pleased when Assembly member who you just had on, I think, Sharon Quirk Silva, recognized how low that was. I mean, it puts us 23rd in the United States in funding for the arts. Comparably, New York is like $2.30, and Minnesota's $7. And so, we're behind here in the state that really relies on creative capital. We're behind in public funding for the arts. So we're pleased to announce that Assemblymember Quirk Silva has actually introduced a budget introduction for $1 for the arts. So at least we would get to $1 per capita per person here in the state of California. So we hope other legislators will follow suit, and the governor will as well.
Right. And like, for example, what could the state do? What could you guys do with $1 per capita, or even $2 per capita, that you aren't doing right now?
Well, one of the things is that the California Arts Council operates as a grants program. It's actually a very, it's a wonderful system where you have to apply to get that funding. You have to go through a grants process. So it's in terms of they really have the systems for it. What we know is that those grants are wildly oversubscribed. So if there's around 11,000 nonprofits in the state of California in the arts and culture sector, they're only able to fund about 12% of those based on the current funding that they have. So the more that we can increase the funding pot, as it were, the more we can get funding into all of our cities and communities, all of our municipalities across the state, to allow arts to be delivered in all of our towns and have more access to it. And those programs are everything from, arts and veterans, trauma and mental health, arts in connection to community health, arts and education, arts in our schools, arts for our young students. So it's really about, and also direct funding to artists. It's really exciting. This last year, the California Arts Council brought back artist fellowships. So, making sure that artists themselves are receiving direct funding. So the more funding we have, the reality is that the arts are systemically undercapitalized. We don't have enough money. And that is why, the romanticization and the paradigm of the starving artist, unfortunately, is true. This is a very vulnerable workforce, and yet they're really needed. And we are more than ever looking to them for so much right now. We need to take care of that workforce. We need to help them, and we need to give them the systems of support, which is going to come partly from public funding.
Wow. Well, fascinating. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Julie. Is there anything else you'd like to get out there before we go?
There's a couple of other things that we'd love to just bring to people's attention that's actually happening this year in the legislature. The governor actually introduced a really wonderful program in his January budget announcement called the California Creative Corps Pilot Program. This would actually go through the State Arts Agency, and this is to a jobs creation program for unemployed artists in local communities to help, in this case, in terms of the pilot, to deliver public health messages in very culturally specific manners, again, employing local artists to really deliver the messages around the behavior change that we need to institute in order to change our world, and also to get the vaccine and things like that.
Yeah.
So it's a great program. It's kind of a loosely WPA, Works Project Administration type program. And at the same time, the legislature, is authored by Senator Ben Allen, has introduced a broader program around really a Works Project Administration type program, workforce development, training, jobs creation, particularly in the arts sector. And what we're really, I think the most important thing right now that I think that is critical for people to hopefully support is that artists are workers, arts are labor, arts are an economic driver, arts are jobs, and we need to create the systems and the funding models to support that and to continue to see that emerge here in the state of California. If we don't get those reopening guidelines and if we don't have the funding, we are quite concerned that with the impact this sector has taken in this last year, that you could see a cultural depression looming for the state of California. But we're confident that the state will recognize the need, the federal government will recognize the need, and if anything, we can emerge stronger as a sector, and hopefully we will have the Roaring Twenties again, as we did the last time, but in a more equitable fashion, with the living wage for artists and a real respect and validation of the need for arts in this state as well as the whole world.
Right. Well said. And if any of our listeners would like to get more information about you or your organization, where could we, I guess, find you online or social media?
Absolutely. So our website is californiansforthearts.org. It's a long one, but we're a small nonprofit ourselves, advocacy organization. And we're on Twitter at CA for the Arts, Facebook and Instagram as well. But just californiansforthearts.org will get you all the info.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us and have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.